Today we'll be discussing the recent movie Saturday Night, and we'll be discussing fluoride. This is Doctor versus Comedian. I'm Dr.Asif Doja, and this is the Doctor of Laughs.
Not our real doctor.
Ali Hassan. Every episode I pick a topic for Ali from comedy and entertainment, and I question him about it. Then Ali picks a topic from medicine and health and grills me on that topic. Today we're continuing our discussion about the 50th season of Saturday Night Live, and we're going to be talking about the recent movie Saturday Night, which basically takes place the night of the first episode of Saturday Night. It's a movie done in real time, so we thought that'd be kind of good to honor that. And a lot of news lately about a certain person in the U.S. who does not like fluoride in drinking water. Here's a hint. This person also has been in the news lately. They have a worm in their brain. If you want to learn about brain worms, check out one of our old episodes. And he also dumped the carcass of a bear cub in Central Park. That's right, RFK Jr. Such a crazy story that, so apparently...
What was the goal there?
He apparently was like driving around, I don't know, somewhere. Again, I'm paraphrasing. I'm getting the story slightly wrong. I apologize. He's driving around and he saw this carcass of a bear cub that had died. So he didn't kill it, so he says. And he said, well, I should probably take this back. So he puts it in his trunk and then kind of forgot about it. And then drives back to New York City. And then he realized, oh, I got to go to the airport, but I have this bear cub carcass in my trunk. So he just dumped it in Central Park. And so people came upon it like the next day. And they're like, what? There's a bear carcass here. And it was like a mystery in New York City for years and years and years. And no one knew who dumped this bear carcass in Central Park, because this is a very unusual thing for Central Park, obviously. And then it just came out like a couple months ago that he did it. And it's just such an unusual thing to do. Anyway.
How did it come out?
He said it in like an interview.
Oh.
And people are like, well, why'd you do it? Why would you keep it a secret? Why are you saying it now? I mean, this guy is, yeah. And you know who he's married to, or his partner is?
I do. Remind me again.
Cheryl Hines from Curb Your Enthusiasm. Again,
Oh, right.
yeah. Think a lot less of Cheryl Hines after I found that out. But anyway, enough of my editorializing about RFK Jr. So how are these topics connected? They're not really. They just both been in the news lately. And I guess RFK Jr. was played on a recent episode of SNL by Alec Baldwin, actually. He's moved from Trump to RFK Jr. So, yeah. Anyway, big episode. Lots of stuff to talk about. So why don't we get going? Okay, so Ali, Saturday Night, as I mentioned, let me give you a bit of a background of this movie. This is a movie talking about the 90 minutes preceding the first 90-minute episode of Saturday Night Live, which premiered in 1974. And so, it's a very fast-paced, frenetic, lots of long kind of tracking shots because it takes place in real time. So obviously there's a lot of embellishment, but this was kind of a labor of love for Jason Reitman. Jason Reitman, of course, the son of the famous Ivan Reitman. Jason born in Montreal. Ivan Reitman, this famous Canadian director. What did he direct? Meatballs, Stripes, Ghostbusters, Twins, Kindergarten Cop, Dave, really just like some great comedies. And he wasn't part of SNL, but of course he cast so many people from SNL in his early movies that he is kind of linked to it. And Jason, of course, knew all these people when he was growing up.
Yeah. Yeah, he was an executive producer also. If you look at his producing credits, he's got like The Late Shift, that TV movie with Letterman. He did that. He's worked with Billy Crystal. He's got Old School, Road Trip. These are all Trailer Park Boys, the movie. I mean, this guy's had his hand in some of the greatest comedies of the last 30 years.
I mean, passed away a few years ago, but really, what a legacy. I mean, Ghostbusters is basically a perfect movie. Like, I just love that movie so much. But Jason Reitman, listen, really liked his stuff, especially his first four movies were Thank You for Smoking, Juno, Up in the Air, and Young Adult. Like, you can't ask for a better four in a row than those movies. I think a lot of people might know the first three. I love. I mean, I just like them so much. Young Adult is probably one that maybe flew under people's radar. Charlize Theron, Patton Oswalt are in it, and basically,
Yeah. Yeah, he does a good anytime Patton Oswalt's doing a
yeah.
serious
Have
role,
you
I would
seen this
say I
movie
would
yet?
recommend it. I have, it's so
It's
good.
like these two people, I think, kind of getting back together when she returns to her hometown, and he was like a high school friend. And it's a typical thing where she's like this beautiful person from high school who basically ignored him all the time, and but then you realize she is so screwed up in this movie, and I just thought it was so great. Also written by Diablo Cody, who wrote Juno. Right. Anyway, I really liked all these movies. Afterwards, Hot and Cold and some of his other movies. The Ghostbusters remake was okay. It was fine. Afterlife, it was okay from a couple years ago. I haven't seen the more recent one. I think it's called Frozen Empire. So I was kind of enthused for him to go get away from the Ghostbusters and go back to, kind of a comedy centered around characters. It is a comedy, it's a drama as well. So that's where we're at with Saturday Night. And so I guess Jason Reitman, what happened was after the success of Juno, he got to do a guest writing week on SNL, which was like his dream. He just loved SNL, grew up on SNL, and he's around our age. He's a bit younger, and so he kind of the same era that I was super into, the early '80s of SNL.
You'll link to an article, I'm sure, Asif, that says, I think it was the USA Today article that says, and Jason Reitman himself, no stranger to SNL, as he did a week on SNL writing and directing. Now, I don't think no stranger to and one episode ever really, like, those two shouldn't go together. However, that said, I have some very complimentary things to say about this particular project.
So I guess, do you want to talk about our thoughts of the movie? Yeah, why don't we talk about our thoughts of the movie itself now? We might have some spoilers about what happens in the movie and versus real life. But first of all,
Might,
what did you
eh?
think
Let's just say
overall?
we do.
What do you think overall this movie?
The key to the format of this, it's a 90-minute movie that is the 90 minutes before the first episode ever of Saturday Night Live in 1975. And it's the mayhem and chaos backstage that is happening before. And mayhem and chaos on a show like this involves lawyers, censors, directors, producers, network execs, people's family. I mean, it is another level of mayhem. It is a crazy thing, especially when it's the first show ever. Some people want to see it fail. Others want to see it succeed. We talked on this show about Jim Henson. And you see, there's also the idea of like writers trying to write for puppets when they have no respect for that process at all. Also, the egos of people, although some of these stories have been, they're fictitious or they're exaggerated. There's no doubt that there are egos. In the 70s, there is definitely inappropriate male behavior towards female co-stars. There is one actor in particular, Garrett Morris, who, is almost like a silent on camera actor. He was not used to his full potential at all. And he was probably felt like he was treated like the help. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but we see that being suggested. Like, do I have no lines
What's
here?
my
And then you
role
see
in
his
this?
sketches.
Why am I in this?
What's my role? Yeah. Why am I in this suggests like, hey man, why did you choose me when all the other great actors are out there? That's not what he's asking. He's like, why choose me and then not use my words when I'm obviously a vocal performer? I mean, that's not even an exhaustive list. The amount of things that you have to capture in this show when you've chosen to do this format. Plus, it's a tick, 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 right? It's a countdown. It's 90 minutes to showtime before they go on air. It's no easy feat to capture all that. And I thought he did a fantastic job. I really, really, my overall assessment of this is to be watched.
I agree with you. I thought it was really good. So I'll tell you what I really liked about the casting in this movie is just unbelievable. And this is
It's
hard
so good,
because
and that's
these
tough.
people
It's
have
tough.
to play real life people who And I guess Jason Reitman said, don't go people who are still alive, the actors who they're playing who are still alive, don't go meet them and he really didn't want people doing like imitating them. And probably the biggest one is Gabriel Labelle. People might remember him from the Fablemans. He basically played a young Steven Spielberg in the Fablemans. He's now playing a young Lorne Michaels. And Lorne Michaels, as people know, is basically the influence for Doctor or inspiration for Dr. Evil in the Austin Powers movie. So it's very easy to do a caricature of him because you just do Dr. Evil. And Gabriel Bell doesn't do that, which is probably the best choice that he made. And he said in an interview that there actually is not a lot of footage of Lorne Michael from this time. Very few interviews. So you kind of have to just create it on your own.
Well, there was a 6-month period where all I was hearing on every podcast I was listening to was Lorne Michaels impersonations. Dana Carvey, Conan O'Brien, Will Arnett, anybody who I was listening to on podcast would do the I don't know if America will find that particularly amusing. And it's just the same. Everybody's doing their own version of the exact same thing. But when you listen to young Lorne Michaels, he doesn't speak like that.
He sounds completely different.
He's on, I guess he would have been on Carson maybe.
Yeah, I think I saw him on Tom Snyder. Maybe there's an interview with.
That's what it was.
Like
that's exactly what it was. He's got the cast with him.
50
That's
years
right.
ago.
Tom Snyder.
I watched that as well. And so, yeah, so anyway, he is, Gabriel Labelle is great. Yeah, it's hard to know if that is exactly how Lorne acted because Lorne is very aloof now, very serious, and this person's a bit more frazzled. They kind of have to be. I mean, he's the main character. So it's really him, and he's often playing off the character of Dick Ebersol, who was an NBC executive at the time, and that's played by Cooper Hoffman, who Cooper Hoffman is, of course, was in Licorice Pizza. He's the son of Philip Seymour Hoffman. Great job with Cooper Hoffman, and I'll just point out some other people in the cast. Corey Michael Smith does Chevy Chase. Amazing Chevy Chase, I thought, really, again, without being an imitation. It was great. Dylan O'Brien does Dan Aykroyd. Again, somehow he captured that. Matt Wood as John Belushi. That was amazing. It seems like you're literally just watching John Belushi on the screen. And then Lamorne Morris, who's from the TV show New Girl, plays Garrett Morris. And every article you read puts brackets, no relation. They are not related, but I thought he did a great job as well.
For Canadians, he's the Bank of Montreal
Yeah,
guy.
That's right. Interesting, you mentioned Jim Henson. So the same actor plays Jim Henson and Andy Kaufman, Nicholas.
Yeah, you know who it is? It's Greg the Egg from Succession.
Okay, interesting.
Did you not know that?
Did
you not see that right away?
I did not know that.
Oh, man. Greg the Egg. Come on, cousin Greg.
Yeah, so that's amazing. One of my complaints about the movie is that I think the women get a bit of short shrift. Rachel Sennett, who is, kind of rising in stardom, plays Rosie Schuster, who is the wife of Lorne Michaels. And that's a pretty good role. I thought that was pretty solid. The other women, who are portraying Gilda Radner, Lorraine Newman, Jane Curtin, I thought that they didn't really get. There's a whole scene with Gilda Radner. There's a big scene with Jane Curtin, but I thought they didn't really focus on them as much, unfortunately. Rosie Schuster, by the way, her father is Ollie.
Yeah, from Wayne and Schuster. I can't remember his first name. Wayne? No. Was it Wayne and Schuster? Frank Schuster, for God's sake. Where's my trivia? I have some trivia for you afterwards.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. So, yeah, I loved Wayne and Schuster, by the way. So funny. Great. These are Canadian comedians, a pair of Canadian comedians. So, and there is some implications that maybe because of her fame and her father, that's why Lorne Michaels got together with her initially. But they talk about that a bit in the movie. So one of the things about this movie is that they obviously compress a lot of events into this 90 minutes that didn't actually happen in these 90 minutes. As well, there's lots of things that didn't really happen. And some of the stuff that I thought was just okay, like Milton Berle plays it like it's J.K. Simmons playing Milton Berle. And he kind of, I don't think any of this really happened. And then he also like exposes himself during it. I'm like, I don't think any of this really happened.
I think there is something, it's borrowed from, if it didn't happen, it's borrowed from something that did happen.
I think some people come off badly, like Milton Berle for sure comes off badly. Johnny Carson comes off badly. They're kind of the villains of the piece. There's some studio execs who kind of are the villains of the piece as well. So I don't know, did those things bother you, Ollie, or not really?
Not in the least. Why would they?
Yeah, I think overall we kind of agree. It's a great movie and it's definitely worth seeing. In fact, so much so, Ollie, that I would be very interested in seeing sequels looking at different points in it. I'd love to see a sequel of, again, that 80s kind of cast, Eddie Murphy, Billy Crystal. I'd like to see one with the
Sure.
Will Ferrell time period, Dana Carvey, Mike Myers. I mean, it's so interesting to pick these periods of time and look at it. And the other thing that's interesting, of course, is they kind of show you little bits and pieces of sketches in this. Some from that episode, the first episode, some like Garrett Morris doing Kill Whitey and Jane Curtin having this monologue there are from not from that episode, but they kind of give you hints of the future of SNL. And it was fun kind of seeing those reenacted. But I thought Ali and I would do a little challenge where we actually watched some clips from the first episode of SNL. Now, it's very hard to find the actual first episode, so you can only find clips and you have to kind of search for them online. I'll give you guys a link where you can check out some of these from a news article. But what did you think of those early sketches, Ali?
I was surprised at how short some of them were.
Very
Some were,
short.
the bulk were under 2 minutes, right? No real arc. You're just getting going and it's over. You're like, oh, wow. Which is the opposite of what I normally experience, which is we have such a terrible attention span that that took a while. Do you know, a little bit of trivia, what the connection between Carson and Saturday Night Live is?
Just from the movie. Is there something else from the movie?
No, why Saturday Night Live exists and how that ties back to Carson.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the movie, what they say, that's the only way I know it, is that Carson reruns would occur on Saturday night. And basically, the NBC executives were trying to prove to Carson, we don't need your reruns. We can do something else. It was a negotiating tactic. So they said, okay, we'll try and fund Saturday Night Live. And in the movie, of course, are they going to play a Carson rerun or are they going to actually let SNL go on? And so is that what you're getting at?
I am in the movie. This negotiating tactic is not what is in the literature.
No, okay.
In the literature, Carson used to do a 90-minute show 5 days a week, and then they'd film a rerun on Saturdays. He said, I don't want to do 90. It's too long. I want to do 60. And also he was like, let's just do 4 days a week of filming. And then it was either Friday, I think it was Fridays would be a rerun. And this was as he was getting older, which was in the 70s and 80s. This is what he wanted to do. Because he was the man, then whatever Johnny wanted, Johnny got. That's why they were like, hey, now we have this 90-minute hole on Saturdays. What do we do with it? That's what opened up the spot that Lorne Michaels took over. So in the, all this literature that I've read as a comedy teacher and a fan of all these books, I've never read anything about NBC having any whatever goals or agenda around there. It was simply Carson being quote unquote lazy. He wasn't. He was a massive hustler, but he's like, let's be realistic here. I don't need to do all this.
I'm not sure. All I can tell you is what they saw in the movie. And then apparently Lorne Michaels has confirmed that Johnny Carson did call him up and say, basically, stay out of Burbank, Los Angeles, that's my territory, and was not supportive, let's say, of Saturday Night Live coming out. So interesting. So in summary, really suggest you guys check out this movie. It's a lot of fun, especially if you have any interest in the history of Saturday Night Live. And if you can, find some of those early sketches from the first episode. Really, really interesting.
Okay, dude. So we are talking about fluoride, something we would have talked about regardless. I think there's no reason we wouldn't have picked this as a subject. It is something that is, in our drinking water, and it is something that people know about from their dentists if they go regularly. But it has become this contentious issue. I thought only recently, but it goes a little bit back. So let's start with, it is, of course, now tied to RFK being named President-elect Trump's, what is he going to be? The head of health?
Something,
what is the something? It's pretty wild. You think you're not? You're going to pay attention, but it's part of a campaign, Maha, which is a very Middle Eastern and Muslim name, ironically, for this group of people, but it's Make America Healthy Again.
Really?
That's
a thing.
RFK has. Yeah.
Boy.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with what is fluoride.
He has, by the way, vowed that on January 20th, the Trump White House will advise all U.S. water systems to remove fluoride from public water. And he says It's an industrial waste associated with arthritis, bone fractures, bone cancer, IQ loss, neurodevelopmental disorders, and thyroid disease. And then make America healthy again. Yeah, he does say that. Okay, so we'll get into those claims in a second. But what is fluoride? It is a element, right? It's on the periodic table. It's the ionic form of fluorine. It's the 13th most abundant element on Earth, and it becomes released naturally into the environment in both air, but particularly in water. And the concentration in water can vary. Okay. So different areas will have different amounts of fluorine in their water. And I'm going to use fluorine and fluoride interchangeably because one's just the okay.
They'll have them in their water naturally
Yes,
occurring,
yes.
you're
Not
saying?
every
Okay.
place, but some places do. So we're going to get to that because that's kind of the key point in some of the evidence that RFK Jr. is pointing to. Water is the major dietary source of fluoride. So you take it in, gets absorbed through the stomach and small intestine, and about 1/4 to a third is then taken up into your calcified tissues, so teeth and bones, and then the rest you pee out. Okay, so like I said, you slowly increase the amount of fluoride in your body over time, and the thought is that fluoride, I mean, helps with teeth, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it may also help with bones. That's a bit unclear. And then of course the concern about low fluoride is the risk of cavities. And that's why the American Dental Association supports fluoride in drinking water.
Did I miss it, or have you said how it makes your teeth healthier, or it contributes to oral health specifically?
No, I didn't. So good point. And so we do know it helps with oral health, but how it does that, it probably has to do, people aren't quite sure, but it has to do with this ion, right? So you get a negative ion from the fluorine, okay? And they think that may have an antibacterial action, and fluoride also lowers pH, and bacteria therefore have to use more energy to get a neutral pH in your mouth, and so they have less energy to grow. And then of course, so you're kind of like depleting them. So those are the ways it's thought to help. So it's directly affecting the bacteria in your mouth that would be affecting your teeth and causing cavities.
If people were going to their dentist twice a year, would they need fluoride in
Okay, so
water, or this
that's a
something?
really good question. And so that is one of the unanswered questions about this whole issue. Okay. So we have to go back in time a little bit to talk about how this ended up happening, right? Because in the early 20th century,
This, when you say how this wound up happening, how it came to be that we're
adding it
adding
to
it
our
into
drinking water.
water.
Exactly, exactly. So in the early 20th century, scientists basically figured out that high levels of naturally occurring fluoride in certain communities, right? Because like we said, different communities, depending on their drinking water and where they live, will have different levels of fluoride. And the ones with higher levels had lower levels of tooth decay. So in 1945 in the US, Grand Rapids, Michigan became the first community in the world to add fluoride to tap water. And subsequent studies showed a lower rate of cavities in school children in Grand Rapids. And then it spread to other towns. And because of this, and they realized that, that's when fluoride became added to things like toothpaste, mouth rinses, or when you go to the dentist and get your treatments or whatever, they add fluoride into that. So it's considered one of the greatest successes in public health in the 20th century because it reduces cavities. And basically it reduces cavities by, it depends on the study you read, 40 to 60% in populations that have it added to their water. So it's not nothing. You can also add fluoride to salt or milk, but we won't really get into that. And we also know that if you combine multiple sources, which is kind of what you were asking before, so in other words, your
Yeah.
water,
So toothbrush, I mean, your toothpaste, your mouth rinse. I don't use an oral rinse, but let's say rinses, toothbrushes,
right,
water,
it also
then it's,
improves, it's additive in terms of improving your dental health. Okay. So that's basically what happened and why we ended up within so many communities.
have there been studies, or maybe I should bring RFK in for this? Have there been studies that looked at the other things happening with communities, their health in particular, who had increased rates of.
Right. Okay. So this is what people are getting concerned about. Okay. So one of the concerns happens with kids. Okay. We get a bit concerned about kids getting excess fluoride, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that's why. Do you remember when your kids were younger, Ali? You'd buy toothpaste when they first started having their teeth, but with no fluoride in it, right? So they recommend not doing that. Just don't want the kids eating some of that. Okay. So there are some areas of the world that have higher concentrations of fluoride. So the recommended amount to be added to prevent tooth decay is 0.7 parts per million of fluoride. Okay. And that was decreased several years ago in both the US and Canada. It used to be 1 part per million, and now it's 0.7 parts per million. Okay. So that was several years ago. They decreased that. Some countries, especially India, China, Pakistan, a lot of the countries in the East, have naturally occurring higher levels of fluorine, up to 1.5 parts per million. And those are the areas where you see problems. So you see what's called dental fluorosis, fluoride affecting your teeth, so in a negative kind of way. And then you can also get what's called skeletal fluorosis. So the dental fluorosis is actually pretty common in the US, and the incidence is increasing. Okay. In the US, 23% of the population has this dental fluorosis. And most of these people have mild or moderate fluorosis, which can kind of initially can just have these little opaque flecks on your teeth that a lot of people don't even notice. Okay. Kind of, if you're in kind of a moderate, you can have some discoloration of your teeth. And then severe dental fluorosis, you don't just get the staining, but it can affect your actual teeth and enamel and cause hypersensitivity and sometimes even damage to your teeth.
This is from too much fluoride.
Right. So, because of this increase they noticed over time in the US, which basically the incidence doubled since 1987, that's why the US Department of Health decreased the target concentration of fluoridated water from 1 part per million to 0.7 part per million. And Canada has done the same sort of thing because they were noticing this. Now, this only occurs in kids. So it's when kids are exposed to excess levels of fluoride, it will affect your teeth. Once you have this is my understanding, I'm not a dentist. Once all your teeth are present, your adult teeth, it doesn't matter how much excess fluoride you're exposed to, you'll be fine. So it's really developmentally that you have to be a bit careful about that. That's again why we use non-fluoridated toothpaste in kids, and why we don't want kids to swallow toothpaste.
Is there something we should be worried about if it's not showing up on your teeth in these opaque flecks, or what you called them, right? The fluoridosis, the fluoridosis? Fluorosis, is it not a concern if it's in large amounts in adults, but in somewhere else in the body, maybe not in the
Okay,
teeth?
so this is an interesting question. So we do know it also gets deposited in the skeleton, okay? And this is
Yeah.
mainly rural areas in places like China, India, Pakistan. It's also occurred in Africa. And so you can basically get like damage to your bones, skeletal pain, limited mobility, osteopenia, which is kind of like thinning of your bones, and it can even affect some of your ligaments. And it can be painful and disabling. So that is a rare complication of it, but it only occurs in places where you have concentrations of more than 1.5 parts per million, almost double of what is recommended in water supplies. Okay. So it'd be very unusual, but not impossible. So in the US, there are some small areas which have higher concentrations of fluoride. So that in just their naturally available drinking water, not added, just in their natural available drinking water, just because of where they live. So that's obviously concerning. I couldn't find a lot of data about Canada, to be honest, when I tried to look for that. But again, I'm not an expert in, the environment or in dentistry. So that's part of what the concern is, but the chance of this skeletal fluorosis happening it's really not going to happen unless you have this level of 1.5 parts per million or higher.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You've mentioned a number of countries in the last few minutes. I'm I'm going to ask you a question about England, Asif. Do you know why I'm going to ask you a question about England?
Because you are being somewhat biased and assuming that they have bad teeth.
I'm not assuming anything. The number of people I've met from the UK who have just a different look on their teeth, and it doesn't look great. What do you attribute that to? Does that have anything to do with
Well,
fluoride?
I looked it up because I thought you were going to
You
ask
don't
me this.
attribute it
No, I don't.
personally.
I honestly don't know the answer how it's related to fluoride, but only about 10% of municipalities in the UK are have fluoride in their water. So maybe that's a possibility, or I don't know. But yeah, so there are these concerns, right? The benefits versus the harms. So other than dental health, there are no benefits to adding fluoride to water. So nothing that's been established. So people are like, well, okay, whatever. As Ali said, I go to the dentist, I get the treatments, I buy toothpaste. What's the issue here? Why don't we just do that? And I will give you the arguments against fluoridation in a second, but this is an issue of equity, and I don't think people are thinking about this enough. It's very easy when you have a dental plan and when you have the ability to buy toothpaste that suddenly, you don't have to worry about this. But if you just look at Canada, low income Canadians are almost twice as likely to suffer from poor oral health compared to high income Canadians. Water fluoridation is a cost effective method to narrow the gap. And again, we all get a cavity. Oh, maybe Ali, you have to have a root canal sometime. Okay, that's pretty painful. But we're talking about dental health, and we've seen it when we see patients who come from lower socioeconomic status. Sometimes it can be, quite impairing, right? Poor dental health. And so that's one thing to think about. I think people who criticize fluoridation often are sitting from a bit of a position of privilege that maybe they're not acknowledging. So, what are some of the arguments? Okay, so one of the arguments is people have different intakes of water, right? So, just because you have a certain parts per million in the area you live, but if I'm drinking more because I'm exercising a lot, or I have diabetes, or I just do manual labor, maybe I'll be exposing myself to more fluoride. One other argument is that you could have also contamination with other things like arsenic when you're fluoridating water. I mean, maybe, but that should be tested. So I'm not so sure about that. One thing which I'll get back to is there is many animal studies and some human studies that show that maybe there's some neurotoxicity, even in small doses, to the brain and to like the thyroid and the skeletal system. Okay. The other concern is that you can get excess fluoride from other things like toothpaste, like we talked about, if you eat it, or from things like tea actually has it, shellfish. So if you're consuming a lot of those other things, maybe you're going to get too much fluoride. Another argument is fluoride is topical. It doesn't have to be, right? It just has to coat your teeth. It doesn't have to be ingested. So it should better be just directly delivering it to the teeth as opposed to ingesting it, which, yeah, that actually I find a very logical argument.
All right. And before British listeners come at me with any hatred, I do want to say this. This is from a dentistry website. Where did the idea of bad British teeth come from? We think the stereotype comes from the fact that the British genuinely did used to have bad teeth. It's funny, but you have to go on to read. Standards of teeth were much worse in the past. They're talking about 1978 and before that. Tooth decay was very common. Habits around genetics were not great. But now it seems that the teeth of Brits are actually healthier than the teeth of Americans, according to
there you go.
OECD
So everybody
figures. Yeah. So younger people coming up in England won't even understand this. They might remember their grandparents had bad teeth, and that would be it. Last thing I want to ask you here is the connection that has been suggested in certain circles between fluoride and IQ.
Right.
What do we know
Yeah.
about that?
So this is a very recent thing that just came out a couple months ago that a lot of people were waiting for. So anti-fluoride activists, dentists were also waiting for this. So this is a study that was done in the US that looked at all the available literature. This is from the National Toxicology Program from the US Department of Health and Human Services, which I think is a department that our good buddy RFK Jr. is going to be heading up. So they reviewed all the literature, and this is what they reported. I'll just tell you what they wrote. They gathered animal and human studies from around the world and weighed the available evidence. They concluded with moderate confidence that there is an association between higher levels of fluoride and lower IQ in children. Okay? And these were studies done from all over the world, but mainly in children who received exposures of more than 1.5 parts per million. Okay, so like we talked about in places like India, China, etc. This was children only. They found that no effect on adult cognition, which is one of the questions you were asking me. They also didn't quantify how exactly fluoride would be affecting your brain. Okay. They looked at a lot of different studies, but a lot of the studies didn't control for something like socioeconomic status, right? Because that could be what we call a confounding factor that could affect your IQ and your dental health, right? Just in other words, you have both of those things are low because of the low socioeconomic status. So anyway, they were able to find 19 studies out of the many studies that they looked at that didn't have this risk of bias that they thought were controlling for these variables. And only a handful of those were done in North America, mainly Canada, and none were in the US. So in other words, there's no actual US data for this US organization. But anyway.
This slippery slope, probably. You're giving me a lot of ideas for comedy here. I think objectively, nobody has ever thought that American kids have a higher IQ than Indian and Chinese kids. I mean, we're flipping things on its head here. And it's very funny because if you're going to be worrying about IQ loss, you have the objectively dumbest people in charge of the education system in the US, removing access to more and more, education and information, but blaming fluoride. So that, I don't know, I find that very strange and very interesting that there's no US data about that.
Yeah. So, there is a statistic that 0.6% of the US population, so about 1.9 million people, have water systems in their community that have naturally occurring fluoride levels of 1.5 parts per million or higher. So it does occur in the US. This is what I was saying. I couldn't find this data for Canada, so I'm not quite sure if that exists in Canada or not. So then it's like, okay, what do? You have to treat that water particularly. You have to be maybe a bit more careful amongst those people. But again, basically what it's saying is, in areas where you have this high level of naturally occurring fluoride, again, mainly in Eastern countries, you need to be concerned not just about teeth, not just about bones, but potentially about IQ as well. But is the risk of getting these IQ problems very high? The average place, say in Canada or the US, that has the normal level of fluoride, 0.7 parts per million, pretty unlikely. And I'll leave you with this last thing. I just found this the other day. It just showed up on my timeline on social media from a guy named Dr. Ryan Marino. He is a medical toxicologist at Case Western Reserve University in the US. And he said the following. This was in his tweet. And he says, toxicologist here about fluoride. The amount of fluoride added to water to prevent tooth decay is so minuscule that no matter your age, size, or health status, you would die from water poisoning before you could ever get toxicity from fluoride. So fluoridated water is safe, in his opinion. So I think that's a good kind of overview that you don't have to be worried, okay, I'm drinking too much fluoridated water, I'm going to get fluoride toxicity. It's not the case. But there are specific areas that we need more information on, especially in areas that have naturally occurring fluoride in high amounts, rarely seen in North America, but more common in other countries. So that's our episode for today. Let us know what you guys thought. Dr. V Comedian on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are everywhere. drvcomedian@gmail.com to email us what you guys thought. What you guys think about Saturday night? Would you like us to do a few more episodes on Saturday Night Live? We'll certainly be covering some performers who've been on the show in the next several weeks. But let us know. And also, what do you think about fluoride? Again, I, as Ali has implied in the past, sometimes shy away from some of these more controversial topics, but I think it's good to go through the data on fluoride. There is something there. There is some evidence for toxicity. So it's important to kind of talk about that, but then be realistic about what we'd expect. So if you want some other topics like that, let us know. Ollie, what do you got going on for December?
I'll be in Chicago in mid-December, December 14th, 15th, and at the Moth, doing a Moth reading. If people don't know what the Moth is, the Moth Storytelling Hour, worth looking up. Very, very engaging. I feel honored to be part of that. Also feel honored to be part of something on New Year's Eve. CBC Television will be doing a New Year's Eve, end of year kind of show. And Ali Sanderson Cooper will be in the house New Year's Eve with Ian Hannamansing. I'll be live from Vancouver on that night. So that's pretty exciting.
It's very exciting. Is your family going to go with you, or are they going to?
They're not. That's why it's exciting. Just kidding. They've got stuff. They've got stuff going on here. New Year's Eve, a big deal around the Hassan house. I'm sad to miss it, but I'm very excited for the reason why I'm missing it.
Well, that is exciting. You know what else is exciting? The fact that,
yes,
although I'm a doctor, I'm not your
Huh?
doctor.
Oh.
Medical issues we talk about are for your interest and information only, and they're not medical advice. Please consult your medical professionals for actual medical advice. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.